This show haven't had an episode released on October yet. And neither it's going to have this year, but I'm filming this on Halloween Day, so close enough. So how about I review something spooky? That was coincidentally chosen in the recent review these games before going on getting a better computer-related hiatus viewer poll. Granted, only 2 people bothered to vote in that, but anyway, here's 2010's formerly Xbox 360 exclusive cult classic action thriller that has a sequel coming right around the corner, Alan Wake. Initially underperforming but eventually finding a sizable audience, this game was first planned to be an open world experience and was planned to be released much earlier when that subgenre was still looking its form. Eventually though, the developers realized the story structure they had planned would have been ill-fitting for open world, so there was a massive overhaul required in order to change the game into a more linear venture. Now I have filled the quota of the obligatory piece of trivia every review of this game has to state, but I'll eventually tell how this change both hinders and benefits the finished product. For today's creatives to be presented, we have the writer/concept designer Sami Järvi, or Sam Lake these days, who has penned pretty much every game in a developer firm Remedy's catalog, including the first 2 Max Payne games and Control, and the original concepter Petri Järvilehto, who after the first 2 Max Paynes and this one went to helm the Angry Birds franchise, and the concept designer / project leader Mikael Kasurinen, who has also done similar stuff in Quantum Break, Control and Battlefield 4. So let's start our tale of a writer who is suffering from a crippling writer's block. Certainly have been there before. Our title character, played by Matthew Porretta, has suffered from it for at least 2 years. So he and his wife Alice, played by Brett Madden, travel to northwestern USA to get in some soothing nerve vacation in this nice idyllic town of Bright Falls, where I'm sure nothing suspicious is ever going on. I mean, aside from quirky residents who are keen to know the bestseller writer's every move. And no, it's not jerky movements and stiff facial expressions that are supposed to make them weird, that's just graphics showing their age. Early motion capture technology was janky, so I'm willing to give developers some slack, but it does it out of the atmosphere. The main influences for this game is said to be TV shows Twilight Zone and Twin Peaks, from which I have seen neither, but I do recognize some X-Files DNA in it. This is also true for the acting style that is said to be mediocre or all over the place, but I don't agree with that. I'd argue it's purposefully stylized, slightly cheesy in order to better reminiscence those 19th mystery shows. This is also true for Mr. Porretta's narration-heavy lead role that has the right amount of restrained pathos without it feeling too comical.
My head pounded with a concussion. I'd never fired a gun outside a shooting range, and now I just killed someone. Or something. There were no bodies. They just disappeared. If I was dreaming, it felt real enough to make me sick.
The mystery part of the plot is put on move when Mr. Wake gets his cabin key from this even more mysterious widower granny resident, spooky creepily voiced by Kate Weisman, who will be a very important part in our protagonist Torment Roomba. This Roomba starts when during the first night his wife apparently gets kidnapped, and the next moment Alan wakes up in the wreck of his car. What even weirder, he starts to find pages from the game's main collectible, the manuscript for his in-progress novel that he doesn't remember writing, but which is able to predict future events. This, however, is merely for building up the player's tension, as Wake doesn't use these predictors to try to avoid unfavorable situations, but acknowledging what specific pages he already has would have probably been too difficult to program. The manuscript offers slight replay value, as some pages can only be found on nightmare difficulty that is unlocked after beating the game in normal. That is my guess anyway. I couldn't tell because of a crash that wiped out all my statistics data. Not that it would have mattered anyway, finding a few new pages that don't affect to anything at all aren't a good enough motivator for me to venture to more difficult challenges. After going through the dark woods filled with dark presence that has corrupted local lumberjacks, Wake finds out there's a weak-sized hole in his memory and that even worse, his lodge is nowhere to be seen and has not been seen since the earthquake in the 1970s, thus ending the thrilling first episode of Alan Wake. The game is not actually distributed in episodic format, but instead the narrative structure is made to resemble the TV show examples I mentioned, coming with previously on segments and everything. The story itself can be a bit hard to figure out at times, but damn, the presentation of it all is top notch. And while character models haven't aged well, lightning effects and environmental design make up for it. Switching from open world was a blessing in disguise, as these large forests and hills ooze threat, and even on calmer daytime sections its scale is impressive, even 12 years later. There are all those peculiar townfolks to bring atmosphere, but they kind of come and go, as the game can't give too much focus on them because of its 6 episodes or around 10 to 12 hours length. Even though traversing through these vast environments either by foot or by car can be hauntingly serene, it's interrupted by cutscenes perhaps too often, and these environments are littered with, it would be an insult towards actual brain teasers to call them puzzles, so let's just say environmental interactions. The other gameplay part is filled with combat. That is the most divisive aspect among critics. And to me, they have their moments, but boy can they be clunky. The main enemies are darkness-corrupted humans known as Taken, who are mostly armed with melee weapons. Their weakness is light, so no matter their size or speed, the strategy dealing with them is the same. First point them with a flashlight to remove their protective dark layer, and then blast them with a gun, that come in pistols and shotgun/rifles, or alternatively insta-destroy them with a torch gun or flashbangs. It's also possible to kill them indirectly, but combat encounters are often too hectic to properly look how many interaction options battle arenas have. But hillbillies drunk on darkness aren't the only opponents, as the darkness is also able to animate inanimate objects. They have gotten criticism, but I appreciate them for allowing having encounters where I can preserve ammo. What I don't appreciate are crows that are annoying nuisances that swoop in relentlessly and are difficult to hit, not to mention determine when they've lost enough from their group to give up. And that's all enemy and weapon types available in the game. That is unless you count cars as weapons. And fighting often gets repetitive. And frustrating when getting cornered in tightly packed dark environments cause unnecessary deaths. This game was released at the tail end of the era when console and computer games were considered to be different genres. And this game's former console exclusivity can be felt from its clumsy control system that so doesn't fit for mouse and keyboard. It does remind me of Enslaved Odyssey to the West that also suffered from slippery movements that made turning a hassle and made aiming chaotic. Well, at least that game has the advantage of having a melee weapon. To the game's credit, battles are made not as dull as they could have been by offering decent variations in scenarios. For example, sometimes you get other people to accompany you, sometimes you get to fight bigger vehicles, and there's a specifically cool battle at a farm in the 4th chapter that I'll let you to find out, but trust me, it's hella rocking. Despite these neat scenes, the lack of enemy variation ensures that this game doesn't work as an horror experience because it reveals all its scare tactics too early. Yeah, there's some debate on is Alan Wake horror or not, but I guess the answer to that question depends on if you consider X-Files to be horror. Nevertheless, this is still a fairly enjoyable experience. There's no denying that the game is a prisoner of its time with its control scheme and plastic-like character models, plus its non-smooth combat can get repetitive, which is why I don't recommend the game's 2 downloadable expansions to Signal the Writer, because the problems with the combat are emphasized so much I didn't even bother finishing the latter. The former's final battle was serviceable though. However, its strong atmosphere, environmental design and quirky narrative managed to carry the whole, and Alan himself is a likable kind of jerk whose antics at least get me amused. It would have probably needed to be longer to keep fleshing out to the rest of the cast, but I also understand that it would have probably been detrimental to the pacing. That is another thing the game manages to do well with juggling between tense and calm moments. Overall the game is just fine, but if you still want to play it yourself, you're probably better off with the 2021 remaster that at least fixed the graphical issues. Not sure about the gameplay though. There's also an independent expansion/spin-off Alan Wake's American Nightmare from 2012 that is apparently more combat heavy, but considering my experiences with the main game's combat, yeah, no thanks. But if you still wish more Wake before the next year's sequel comes out, in 2019 action-adventure Control, there's apparently an expansion that combines those games into a shared universe. And that game I do have, so perhaps I shall take a look at it at some point in this show. At least once I've gotten a computer that runs it smoothly. Back to that grind, I suppose.
I'm Alan Wake. I'm always right about everything. And if I don't get my way, I'll sulk all day long. I'm always intense and moody. It makes me very attractive and mysterious. Right now, I'm just standing here because I need my best friend Barry to carry me. But that's okay. I can just take him for granted.